we came to hitchhike on to Dallas, and the recruiting office was in the top floor of the Magnolia building where the Red Horses are. And we stayed there near, well, I guess it's probably 4 hours. And they said, now you got to go get your parents to sign for you. So we hitchhiked back to this little town. They finally talked them into signing for us. And they brought us back to Dallas, and they got us on a train that headed us to San Antonio. And we got down near Waxahachie. Well, back then they didn't have the communications that they have today or had later on, and they'd had a train wreck at Waxahachie. So we had to they had to back the train all the way into Dallas and go through Fort Worth, and we got to San Antonio about 10 o'clock next morning. And they put us out, it had been raining, and it was cold and wet, and I said, they put us out in those tents, and I said, what in the world I got myself into? And they didn't have any equipment hardly then at that time. And so I had an old pair of cowboy boots on. I wore them things for a month, and hobbling around in them, and they put us a little old pack on the back that had the mess kit in it and the shaving articles and a raincoat, and give us that old M1 rifle. And we hiked about a mile, and I said, I thought I was tough working in them fields, but I said I found out I wasn't tough. And so I made first class before I got out of boot camp. And I was drawing $21 a month. But I didn't draw, and then if you get first class, you get $6 extra, but you've got to wait until you get out finish boot camp to get that money. So after I got out of boot camp, they put me in Fort Sam Houston, the 2nd Infantry Division, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And I stayed there and trained with them for, I guess it's about 5 years. No, I'm sorry, about 2 years. And we went all over, everywhere. We had to go to Louisiana maneuvers for 2 months every year. And the only place we slept was on the ground, the wet ground. And we drank water out of the bayous. The water was so clear and pretty. And we stayed there for 2 months in all kind of weather. And the last day of the maneuvers every year, we had to swim the Sabine River and back, across into Texas and back. That ended maneuvers. And so we did that for 2 years. And so then I went out on a cadre and went to Paris, Texas. Well, first I went to Camp Bullis. That was down at Bastrop. I'm sorry, Camp Swift at Bastrop, my farm, 95th Division, and stayed there for about 4 months. And then we went from there on a cadre to Paris, Texas, to Camp Mexican. We formed 102nd Infantry Division there. And then we went from there back to maneuvers in Louisiana again, and then they sent me overseas, and I joined the 1st Infantry Division in England. And we trained, and we made a mock invasion of the actual invasion. We attacked the French coast off of the ships, and we didn't know it till just some few years ago that the Germans had a submarine in the channel, and they'd sink a ship, but it had something like 50 or 60 boys on it that drowned, and they didn't let that out until sometimes back, I guess 10 years ago. The English started finding buttons of the American uniform washing up on the bank, and then they finally let it out. But it was the same thing as the invasion in Normandy. But we kept training and training and training, and it was horrible training. And they taught us to kill. Now, if these boys today had to go through what we went through then, they wouldn't none of them ever make it. And so finally, they put us we could go anywhere we wanted to in England there whenever we was off duty. So one night they told us that, well, we're going to move into a marshalling area. Well, they moved us into I guess it's about a 40 or 50 acre cluster of timber. It was real dense, and we couldn't light a cigarette, or we couldn't have a light at night, and we couldn't get outside of that timber area during the daytime because the German reconnaissance planes is flying over all the time. And we stayed there about 2 weeks, I guess, and so we had to study the maps that the aircraft was taking, our reconnaissance planes was taking. We had to study the maps nearly 24 hours a day, and you knew where you were going whenever you hit the beach. And so finally they said, well, we're going to go. And we took us and put us on the ships, and it was supposed to went on June the 5th. But the weather was so rough that the channel was waves were so high that it canceled it till the 6th. And then they said, well, we'll go. And the channel was the roughest it had been in 10 years. And the waves were 8 and 10 foot high. And we sailed, we started sailing about 11 o'clock that night, and about 3 o'clock the next morning we anchored. And we're something like 4 or 5 miles off of the land, off the coast. And there's ships everywhere in the world. Later they said there's something like 6,000 ships in the channel at night. And so about that morning we were on a ship that was a Japanese transport ship, had been captured by the Americans, and the British was manning it. They had the crew on it. And we had for breakfast, we had a cold corned beef sandwich and a hot cup of tea for breakfast that morning. And in our packs, we had 3-day rations, and we had 6 hand grenades and 150 rounds of ammunition. And we had our gas mask, and I had all kind of other Bangalore torpedoes and all kind of equipment to blow the barbed wire up with. And so we had to climb with through a ladder over the side of the ship. It was probably 100 foot long, and you had to climb over that ship sides on that ladder, rope ladder, to get into those little old boats flopping around down on the side of the ship. And a lot of the boys fell into the boats and they lost their grip. But anyway, we got into it, and we started circling the mother ship. That was the transport we was in. And we circled it till about, I'd say it was close to 5:30. And then they all started in a horizontal line, one right behind the other, those little landing crafts. And there's probably 35 or 40 yards apart behind each other. And then about I guess it was probably about 6:20, they all turned toward the beach. And the water was so rough, lots of those boats sank before they got to the beach. And it was just awful rough. And boys were sick, and they didn't care whether they was going to live or die then, whenever they was that sick. And so we probably about 3 or 4 miles off of the beach, and just kept headed that way, one right beside the other one of the boats. And there wasn't so much shell fire on that beach that morning, which we didn't think that an ant could live on it. And so they're supposed to bomb it, but the bombers, they couldn't see the target, so they had to call them all back in. And I think that something like 400 bombers supposed to bomb that morning, but they never bombed any. I think there were 4 bombers that dropped their bombs, and they dropped them on American troops on Omaha. And I talked to one of the bomber pilots up in Denton back in '94, and he said that they just dropped them on it by mistake. But anyway, well, the coxswain run our boat right out on the sand, just run it right on the sand. The front of the boat dropped out, and I was a salt section leader of one of the boats, and my guide, I went to the right out to the right, and he went to the left, and a shell hit between us, and it blew us, I guess, 30 or 40 foot apart. And we lay there, and they had a machine gun trained right in the front of that boat, and it killed everyone behind us. And so we laid there probably 5 seconds, seemed like eternity. I told my guide, I said, well, we can't stay here and die. And so he said, when you get ready to go, holler. And I said, let's go. Well, he just raised up and he said, Deeds, they got me. And so I finally got up and run away, and they hit me again. And it's about 100 yards of just level sand, nothing, no protection. And so after the third time, they knocked me down, and I got up and hobbling through there, and the machine gun bullet was kicking up sand in front of me, back and forth in front of me. I finally made the ball. And it was a disastrous day. But we did it.
You said when you guys came up in the LSTs, when the bow came down, you and your captain were the first ones
I
up?
was a leader.
Okay.
We did. Originally was for the 4 platoons in the company, and there's 4 is a officer for each platoon. Well, they just divided them down to where they made 6 assault sections out of the 4 platoons. So they didn't have an officer, so I was assault section leader, and same as I was taking an officer's position, and so I led my men out of the boat.
And
what came out of it, what made it, what made it.
You told me that you lost all of your guys but one.
I think they all went but one. His name was Hatfield from Georgia.
He was the only one that made it?
I've never met him since then.
Really?
We separated during the time of evacuation, and I never met him again.
What was it like when you were advancing on the beach? Was it a quick advance, or I know the gunfire was extremely heavy, I know.
It was hell. One of them is the mortars and the machine guns and the 88s, and that everywhere, just going off everywhere around you, just continuously. Those Germans, they had that 88 artillery, and if you'd stood there in a position, if it was 20 miles away, that third shot they'd put in your hip pocket. That was that accurate. And they had a mortar, they call it the Screaming Mimi. It had 8 rounds rolled, and it'd go, and we call it the Screaming Mimi. And then their machine guns, they were about 7.6 millimeter, I guess. And they would fire faster than any gun we had. I saw boys laying there with their blown off me here, with their heart still trying to beat. And their legs blown off. Arms blown off. I can't make a baby like that. They might fake it, but they can't make it.
So altogether, you were shot 5 times?
Yes. And whenever you see your friends that you lived with, partied with for years and months upon months, and then see them fall beside you, it's just like a brother. And whenever you see those bodies out there floating around, it's just blown half in two, and their legs blown off and their arms blown off. And then some of them laying out so wounded so far we couldn't get out to help them if we could have. Crying mama. And then they had mines after we got into we called it the wall of the cliff. Then they had mines on posts about 3.5 foot high, all jagged along there. And whenever the tide, we hit it at low tide, and whenever the high tide came in, then they were covered with the water, and those boats coming in, they just hit those and disintegrate. You'd see boys flying 100 foot in the air, and they just disintegrate.
You also mentioned about the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, that was what happened whenever we went through. I don't know what valley that was, but it's something kind of like Grand Canyon. It was a real deep canyon, and they had those pillboxes along in those sides of that canyon. Well, after they went through there and taken them, the Americans didn't destroy them. And then whenever they came back through, well, we had to get back on the line. We was at Lee H. Belgium then, and we had to root them back out of there, out of those pillboxes. But then they blew them. They destroyed them. And that Argonne Forest, it was those had so much firepower going through there that they were cut off. It was about 4 and 5 foot high. There wasn't nothing above 4 and 5 foot high or stumps. It just destruction. And that fortified line that they said they couldn't cross from Belgium and France into Germany. Well, we crossed it anyway. And they said you couldn't cross the Rhine River. We crossed it anyway. My brother helped build the first bridge across the Rhine River. And they just got it finished just after the Remagen Bridge collapsed. We went across the Remagen Bridge, and the Germans tried to blow it, but we didn't let them blow it all the way out. But it was bad, but it could have been worse, I guess. We could have lost it.
True.
We could have lost it.
Well, as far as like the weather conditions,
On Normandy?
Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, wherever you were, I mean,
It was the worst storm had been in Normandy on the channel in 10 years.
really.
The waves was 8 and 10 foot high. And those little old boats is about as long as this room, a little bit longer, maybe 10 foot long, and about half as wide. Hold 33 men to walk in there. And the engines was in the back, had 2 Chrysler engines in the back of it. And the ones we hit, the beach end didn't have no reverse. The boys had to stay there.
Really? Oh my.
So they'd grab a rifle and come out.
Now, out of your platoon, can you tell me some stories about some of the guys that you lost that day? Can you tell me, do you have any fond memories of you and the guys back in the day?
We're all just like brothers.
Really?
We lived together, we played together, we partied together, and we worked together.
Can you remember any names or any stories or things that you
Just
did?
that Hatfield, the only one I remember.
Really?
But I do remember whenever I was getting pretty close to that beach that morning, and that machine gun fire was shooting up and down in front of me. I remember the first sergeant. I don't know how he ever got to the ball, to the cliff. But he had got there, and after I got up, I guess, about 30 yards of that cliff, and he said that machine gun was kicking up that sand in front of him, and he hollered, "Deeds, get down, you crazy SOB, get down." And I don't know how I heard that morning. But it meant me for me to hit the ground, you know.
Yeah.
I hit the ground.
Now, after you were shot 5 times, you lay there on the beach for like 2 days or something?
2 nights and days.
2 days and 2 nights.
And then we got on a boat and we stayed there. Well, we got off with it on the 10th in England.
Wow.
That's the first time I ever shot penicillin on a boat.
Really?
He shot us every 3 or 4 hours on the boat.
So it was about 4 days from the time you...
But it'd be 2 days, 2 or 3 days. I don't, you can't remember just exactly,
Sure.
but it is something like 3 days, I guess, on the boat. I don't know, but when it was 10th of June when we got back to England.
Okay. And during that time frame, with your injuries, you took what, like 3 morphine shots to try to help out with the pain? Those morphine injections, how many did you have?
Yeah, they had
You told me,
little,
like,
about
3?
the size of a cigarette, and it was about an inch and 3/4 long, and it's a little aluminum tube, like toothpaste, and you just snap that top up, and there's a little needle, and you just injected yourself with morphine.
How many of those did you have? Do you remember?
I think there's 6 of them.
Did you go through all 6?
Yeah, I used them. I did. I used them probably that first day.
Wow.
You'd hurt. It'd hurt. You'd hurt. Every time you'd move, it'd hurt.
Where all were you shot? Where all did you get shot?
Both right foot was my worst. Well, I guess my hip was the worst one, but right foot and both knees, and one that went through arm here and come out up here, and then I was hit in the left arm here and come out back here. But you can't tell it ever hit you. This stings like fire.
When you said you were doing stuff for Patton's army,
We were hauling gas to Patton. I just wanted to get out of that ordering room. I didn't want to be a first sergeant, so he just said, "Well," said, "I'll let you be assistant dispatcher and do what you want to do." And we had me and a boy that taking care of the rifles. We had a room always bigger than this. This was after the war. We was at Nuremberg, stationed at Nuremberg when the war. Well, whenever we took that last load to Patton, and you have to travel at night, and you don't have any lights or anything. You just don't move 5 or 10 miles an hour, and just have little slits of lights so long, and the tail lights and then the headlights, and you just follow them. And so I had to bring up the last truck that night. That last load was hauled. I brought up the last. I'd been out partying for a week. I'd been down to Reims, France, and I don't know where else. But I told the captain, I said, "Well, I'll go with him on this last trip." And so I went with him. I was bringing up the last truck. And then we noticed those planes that morning, those German planes, fighter planes, flying in and just landing anywhere they could, out in fields or anywhere, with their gears up or down, either one, And but we didn't realize the war was over. But they didn't want to be captured by the Russians, so they was flying into the American side just to be captured.
Yeah, because Americans would treat them with
right.
Because of Geneva Convention or just the way we.
The Russians would kill them.
Yes,
and they knew that.
Yes. What was the closest, as far as whether on Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, whatever? What was the closest confrontation as far as you to the German bad guys? What's the closest?
I guess it's the Battle of the Bulge.
The Bulge?
I was getting pretty close then.
Really?
Like my eye.
Really?
But you knew as a human. he wouldn't be there just like you. Just had to. But that last battle, that those battles, he had kids in there 12 and 14 years old. Been military, Hitler did. But it was cold up there. It was cold. My God, it was cold. Snow, ice. It was so cold. And you didn't have anything but a pair of wool socks and the old boots on. And you had that old overcoat weighed about 10 pounds when it got damp to 15 pounds.
I remember hearing that a lot of the American troops were just ill-prepared uniform-wise and equipment-wise for the climate conditions.
They didn't have equipment for good cook. Whenever we hit the beach, we had impregnated clothes. They call it for gas. Hitler would use gas on the beach, and so they were old wool, and they was impregnated, and they were so hot and sticky, and we had that's what we hit the beach in, those impregnated old wool uniforms, and they'd stick to you, and we didn't have anything else to wear until. Well, I didn't have anything until I got back to England. But they sure Hitler was going to use gas. And they had a gas mask. The big old thing that hang down here about that square and had a tube run up to you. Big mask around your face. But he didn't use gas.
So whenever Patton gave you guys the news that the war was over, what did you guys do? I mean, did you hang out there for a while, or how did the next few weeks or months go for you?
Well, whenever we got there, we unloaded, and then of course if you couldn't stay, we just headed right back to camp to Nuremberg. And then we got Nuremberg. Well, the captain sent me back to an arm boy that taking care of the armor sent us back to Offenbach. That's all across the river from Frankfurt. It was on the Mainz River, and looking for a place to move back to stay after the war. And so we went back and we found it was a big tax office building. It was about, I guess, a block and a half long, and it was 3 stories, and so it was empty. And so we got with the council there, and I did, and we got permission to move into that building. And so we all accompanied them. We moved back into that building and stayed there till I had to stay there 6 months. And after the war was over, before that captain let me come home. And so one evening, he said, Deeds said, "Come up. We're going to have a party." He said, "There's going to be some wax up here." And of course, there's up at SHAEF headquarters up at Frankfurt. And I wasn't supposed to even be around up in there because I was just an enlisted man. I was non-commissioned officers. And there's all officers up there. But anyway, he said, "Come up here," said, "We're going to have a party tonight." And I went up there and we had a party. I stayed all night up there, and next morning I had my old Jeep, faithful Jeep. And I come back to camp, and about, I guess it's about 3 hours, he called me. He said, "Deeds," said, "get ready, we're going home."